Okay, so we are working through Job's response after Eliphaz's second speech, and he's not particularly responding directly to Eliphaz, although he does say some things, that are applicable to Eliphaz and to the other two counselors. But he is going to be talking about his situation and describing that, and describing his hope, and that's the section we're in right now. He's going to describe his hope, and then after this, he's going to go into almost despair, almost complete despair, but he's going to be held off by a glimmer of faith that he has. But this is the high point as far as statements of faith go in this chapter. And I said last week that we would go through the chapter twice. The first time, which we're doing right now, we're looking at Job and his situation as he describes it. We want to understand what's being said. And then after we do that, we're going to go back through and look at how Job prefigures Christ. And so we're going to pick up by reading Job 16, 19 to 21. Job says, "Even now, behold, my witness is in heaven, and he who testifies for me is on high. My friends scorn me. My eye pours out tears to God, that he would argue the case of a man with God, as the son of man does with his neighbor." Excuse me. And I want to read that in the NIV as well. So NIV, Job 16, 19 to 21, "Even now my witness is in heaven, and my advocate is on high. My intercessor is my friend, and as my eyes pour out tears to God on behalf of a man who pleads with God, as one pleads for a friend." So I like the NIV. I think it's a little more, what's the right word? Friendly, I think. It feels warmer somehow. But as we look at the passage, we see that Job is calling this one his redeemer, his witness in heaven. He's calling him a witness, an advocate, an intercessor, a friend. And last week we talked about briefly witness. Jesus is the one who witnesses, not just for us, but in this passage for Job, the one in heaven who witnesses on his behalf and says, yes, he really is innocent because he's one of mine, and I have covered him with my righteousness. And so he is not guilty of all the things that are being said against him. Jesus is also our advocate. And a lot of these definitions, kind of overlap. Advocate is like a witness, he speaks as a defender for the accused. And it's usually in a context of a court setting. And of course, if we think about God's courtroom and his judgment, then this works just exactly right. It's a perfect image. And Job has been speaking a lot, and so have his friends, in kind of courtroom language. Job's on trial. That's how he feels the whole time. And he's been condemned by at least one of his friends and is on the way to being condemned by all of his friends. And Job's hope is that God, this Redeemer in heaven, will reverse that, will say, no, that's wrong. Job is not condemned. And so Jesus is in heaven as Job's advocate, one who speaks on his behalf. And that also, I don't have any passages for this. I could easily go to some, I think, and I think you probably all could think of them. But so Jesus says to the Father in the picture here, Jesus says to the Father words which represent us. And in a lot of cases, I think they're not the very words that we would use, right? We don't speak rightly about our situation often, but Jesus speaks rightly about the situation and about our relationship to him and why we are not guilty and all of that. And so as the advocate, he speaks the true words about the right understanding of the situation. And so he's doing that for Job. 1 John 2:1 talks about our advocate. "My little children, I'm writing these things to you so that you may not sin. But if anyone does sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ, the righteous." So we sin and we, stumble through a prayer of repentance and asking for forgiveness. And Jesus translates that into something that's actually useful. and, uh, and secures again the statement of not guilty, or states to the Father, not guilty. 1 Timothy 2:5, advocate is like a mediator, go-between. And so we have 1 Timothy 2:5 talking about Jesus. There's one God, there's one mediator between God and man, the man, Christ Jesus. So Job is appealing to somebody not himself, and he's not appealing to his friends. He's not appealing to any human advocate. He's appealing to one who is in heaven and is standing in the Father's presence in the courtroom, and who with absolute authority and absolute complete knowledge can be an advocate for Job. And I believe that Job believes in a divine redeemer. So he's calling for that, mentioning that. He's also called, the one that Job is calling upon or mentioning is also called the advocate. And I was right, I did advocate, sorry, intercessor, lost my place. Intercessor, one who acts between parties with a view to reconcile differences. In 5:1, Eliphaz had said to Job, "Call now, is there anyone who will answer you? To which of the holy ones you will turn?" Job ultimately concludes there is no holy one, no angel to whom he can turn, who will be an advocate or an intercessor or mediator in his, who will mediate. And of course, an angel can't be a mediator, right? Because a mediator has to represent both parties, but an angel represents neither. He is not God and he's not man. So he can't really take your place and mediate and stand in as your representative. And Job rejects that idea, and I don't know why he rejects that particular idea, but I know why I reject that idea. I just explained it. But Job at this point now is sure that there's such a mediator, such an intercessor in heaven. And I had put in the notes 1 Samuel 2:25, where Eli says to his rebellious sons who have been sinning against the Lord, he says, if someone sins against a man, God will mediate for him. I'm reading from the ESV. But if someone sins against the Lord, who can intercede for him? Now, I always say this every time I go here. Some of your Bibles will have a different translation. If someone sins against a man, the judges will mediate for him. And many of you will have a note in your Bible that says that, or the judges, right? Instead of God there. If one person sins against another, the judges may mediate for the offender. The ESV translates it God, and the NIV in the text puts God, but then puts a note for judges. I think actually Eli's point is that if a man sins against another man, they can come before the judges who God has appointed, judges in the Old Testament sense, who settled disputes and told you what the law said and that kind of thing. They can go to the law, and the judge could reconcile them and can mediate between them and bring them both together, the human judge who God had appointed. But if you sin against the Lord, well, there isn't anyone who can represent you at that point, because that mediator would have to be God and man. That's the point of the passage, I think. And I go to this passage a lot. I think it explains exactly why Jesus has to be both God and man. He's going to mediate between Job and God. He has to represent both parties, and not just in an intellectual way. He actually has to be man and he has to be God. And so that was Eli's. Eli thought the answer was the question he's asking: if someone sins against the Lord, who can intercede for him? He thinks the answer is nobody. But he's wrong about that. Job has come to the conclusion that there's somebody in heaven is going to mediate for Job. So, anybody have any thoughts about any of this yet?
No. No.
I never thought about the question in this case.
So Job, I think you said this, but Job is sort of updating his, he's revising what he sort of thought before. I have no advocate or nobody can mediate. And now he's sort of coming to a new realization.
Right.
Or a new conviction that he has.
Yes, I think what's going on with Job is we see as we read through the book of Job, if we're sensitive to what Job is saying, and if we don't just whitewash everything and say everything he's saying is absolutely true and right, and he's speaking from a good attitude, but we see his actual growth and maturity as we go through this. And what we see is that his thoughts about how the basic problem Job is struggling with is how can I be made right with God again? How can my relationship with God be restored? And as we go through the book, Job is thinking through every possible avenue of how to restore that relationship, and they are all cut off. Every one of them, he concludes, I can't fix it. My friends can't fix it. That kind of thing, right? We went through the one chapter where he had 6 different ways he thought it could be fixed, and not one of them. But he comes to the conclusion that the only way that it can be fixed is if God actually does it, if God intervenes and does it. And I think that it's interesting that Job never expresses that well, I'll say it this way, he always holds on to a glimmer of hope that the problem will be fixed. It's basically a bedrock conviction of his that the way things are between him and God is not right and it cannot remain. And that it will therefore be fixed. But that bedrock conviction relies on Job's knowledge of God as just and good. Right? If God is not just and good, then there's no reason to expect the situation to get any better. But God is in a relationship with Job, which has not been revoked. And so Job has this expectation which he can't shake. That's the thing, right? He can't shake the expectation of things being made right. And so he has basically followed a more or less, rational argument, rational path, and said it could be fixed this way. Oh no, that won't work. It could be fixed this way. No, it won't work. And he finally comes to only God can fix it. And then he will become more sure in his conviction that not only can God fix it, but God actually will fix it. And that's going to be in chapter 19. God actually will fix it. And why will God actually fix it? Well, because God is who he is. God doesn't change. God shows faithfulness and loving kindness to his people. He's made commitments to them. And despite appearances, what God has made a commitment to, God will bring to pass. So anyway, that's a really long answer, Mike, but I think he's kind of made his way to this point through rationally thinking about it, and also through God having already revealed himself to him. So his mind is being used, his rational thinking is being used in the service of his knowledge of God. So underneath or in the service of revelation, right? Rationality in the service of revelation. And he comes to the conclusion that it will be fixed. And the conclusion, though, is no different than the conviction that he's always had, but now he can see a way. Now he can see a way. So he gets to the point, where the disciples were when Jesus, said it's easier for a camel to go through an eye of a needle than for a rich man to get to heaven. And they said, well, then who can be saved? Right? They said, it's not possible then for anyone to be saved. Job got there lots of times. Not possible, not possible, not possible. And Jesus said, yeah, but with God, everything is possible. And so Job is now at that point. Yeah. Catherine, I'll go back
I'm
to you, Mike,
sorry,
in
I
a minute.
changed. I'm sorry, I
Go
can
ahead.
wait. I'm sorry, I
Uh,
changed my mind. I said no, so is that allowed? I
Yes,
changed
you
my
can,
mind.
you can
We'll
withdraw
take
your,
that under advisement.
yeah, well, you can withdraw your comments to another time. Maybe Mike has nothing to say. Let's see what Mike has.
I guess
Now
just
Go ahead, Mike.
following up on what you were talking about, Chuck, maybe I think I've follow what you're saying. I'm not, I don't think I'm necessarily saying anything contrary, but maybe just a little more refining kind of the end part of like he's used reason and he's sort of continued to work through it. But I get like these last couple of chapters that it almost seems like prophetic, like he's speaking prophecy almost, like he's prophesying. And so and as you mentioned, he's gone through like methodically, like all these different ways to exhaust all his options. So I think he's like, yeah, he's following like a reasoned path, but he's exhausting it. He's getting to the point where he's exhausted reason and starting to maybe see more like more by the spirit or by faith, starting to elevate himself a little bit to not necessarily that all of his reasonings were in vain or fruitless, but it sort of allowed him to set all that aside and see that like there's not he needs to go more toward with seeing by faith and not by sight.
Yeah, definitely. That's, I think that's been always there with Job, is that he's always, I mean, I guess one way you could frame the argument between Job's friends and Job is the difference between walking by faith and walking by sight. The friends argument basically comes down to this: I can see with my own eyes that you're guilty. Look what happened to you. You're obviously guilty. And Job is not looking at the world the same way, right? He's saying, no, I'm not guilty. And he's looking internally at his own life and at his heart. But he does also, in the course of his discussion, start looking more outward to God and saying, God, I mean, the basic, I guess I got too many thoughts. The basic thought that he and the friends share, which is true, is that God is just. And so because God is just, Job concludes, God will fix this, because this is an unrighteous, unjust situation. I'm being accused of things I've never done. And this has to be, I have to be vindicated. That's his whole point. And it predicates on the justice of God, that God would then fix it, especially since Job can't fix it. Job's friends, on the other hand, are saying God is just, and it's obvious you got what you deserve. So they both have God's justice at heart there. Yeah. So I'm going to go to Catherine. Catherine.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for waiting.
I'm on this. Oh, you're very welcome. Everything is worth waiting and hearing, that's for sure, from everyone. I think I'm on the same path with Mike.
Okay.
I was going to ask, and I say that because I was going to ask if it would be appropriate to think at this point in time where we are with Job, when you think of where everything started, he was at a point of total despair. And to me, that's not even strong enough as to how he was feeling. He was in shock. He was in mourning. He was in total loss, absolute confusion. I mean, you could go on describing, to the best of our ability, the horror that Job has gone through. And then to top it all off, he has friends that are so he thinks, attacking him. So I'm thinking, after experiencing all this ugly, all this pain, all this terrible emotional wreckage that he's endured, he does sound now, okay, it's time to breathe. I
Mm,
think I can think. I
Mhm.
think I remember. I think I will. And does that make sense? That's my question.
it does. And especially
Okay,
in
thank
light of,
you.
in light of, I think at the beginning of a recent chapter, Job said to his friends, I'm done listening to you. You basically
Mhm.
haven't said anything worthwhile, and I'm going to stop listening. And
Mhm.
and I think he's been spending a lot of energy, trying to defend himself against his friends, and this is distracting from the actual
Mhm.
issue, right?
Okay.
And he's going to still kind of respond to his friends as we go through the rest of his speeches, but I think you can see that the focus of his words, the addresses to the friends get smaller and smaller, and the time spent reflecting on his situation and talking to
Mhm.
God gets larger and larger proportionally.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so his attention is moved, you know.
Yeah.
And
Calm
so I
down.
think that I think that's in line with what you were saying, I think.
Hmm.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
guess just one more thing. I'm jumping a couple of verses ahead of where we are now, but beginning of verse 17, my spirit is broken. Um, that just got me thinking to like just looked up a couple of the Psalms I think I was thinking of. Psalm 51. You do not delight in sacrifice, or I would bring it. You did not take pleasure in burnt offerings. My sacrifice, O God, is a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. You, God, will not despise. And then even I think more appropriate, the righteous, Psalm 34, the righteous cry out and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all their troubles. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Um, so we've been talking about how like Job feels this distance from God, or like God is not with him, right? And it
Mm-hmm.
seems like he's sort of reaching this place where the Psalm 34 refers to here of, crying out and brokenhearted and crushed in spirit, and the Lord is close to those who are crushed in spirit. So
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like God is sort of starting to approach him at this point, and he's now starting to say these, starting to see the light. I think he gets into that at in 17 as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we'll see a lot of that. I mean, the whole God is close to those who are crushed in spirit. The idea is that God reveals himself to the humble, those
Mm.
that are in humble situation, right? Lost everything and they know it, and don't have anything to offer. This is what Job's been going through, right? The whole, what can
Mm.
I do to fix this, right? He's
Well,
got to the point now, he's like, I can't do anything to fix this. And he's going to be describing himself in terms in chapter 17 in particular of someone who is completely lost, without God. He's lost everything and has no power. And so so after we do that, after we go through the passages the first time to see what he's saying, and then we go through it the second time about how Job prefigures Christ, then the passages about that you just referred to, passages like those passages in the Psalms that talk about God comforting people in Job's situation, uh, will make sense make more sense. There'll be a
mm.
fuller appreciation of those things. And I might ask for your help, Mike, in particular, but anybody else who wants to go through chapter 17 and just look for those types of passages. And, I'm going to try to compile a list because I don't have them listed because my focus was Job and Jesus, which I think you're going
Mm.
to find fascinating.
Mm.
But then the comfort of God in those
Mm.
situations might be another good set of passages to look at.
Mm.
So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So we were talking about mediator, intercessor. Um, there's three other passages I wanted to look at. Actually, yeah, three more. So Isaiah 53:12, talking about Jesus, Job's mediator. Job's intercessor. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the many, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul to death and was numbered with the transgressors. That he bore the sin of many, and he makes intercession for the transgressors. So the suffering innocent, the righteous one, Jesus, he makes intercession for the transgressors. And of course, if he makes intercession for transgressors, he makes intercession for us and for all his people, even those who haven't sinned in the way they're being charged. They're still, in the transgressors, the many, the people whom Jesus saves. Romans 8:34. This is Job's thought here, right? Who is it to condemn? He's like looking at his friends and going, you can't condemn me. I got one in heaven, right? Who is it to condemn? Christ Jesus is the one who died, more than that, who was raised, who is at the right hand of God, and who indeed is interceding for us. This is what Job is seeing. I think he's seeing with his, his spiritual eyes, right? He's seeing his mediator standing in heaven and interceding for him, much like Stephen, when he was being stoned, he looked up into heaven and he saw Jesus standing at the right hand of God. And everything was fine because he saw that. Hebrews 7:25. Consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. So I think these passages are informatory to us about Job's thoughts and his situation. I don't think that it's wrong to take the ideas from these passages and say, this is what Job is talking about when he says, I've got a mediator in heaven. He's representing me. He's my friend. He's my intercessor. He's talking about somebody who will do everything that we see Jesus is doing in these passages. And so he, I guess it would be easy to say Job has faith here. And he's got the content of his faith is actually not that very different than the content of my faith. Just maybe there's some things he doesn't know, like the name of the mediator. but he understands what's going on and what's at stake, and how the work of this mediator will reconcile him to God, so that he doesn't, he is actually, he understands the goal of the sacrificial system, to show the mediator who will take care of your sin and reconcile you with God. So then the last title in Job's words there is friend. Friend. And John 15:12-15 talks about the mediator being our friend. Let's look at that. Jesus says, this is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends, if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you servants, for the servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends, for all that I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you. Now, one of the things Job is absolutely sure of is that he has done what God has commanded him to do. That he has done all of it. And he's been consistently arguing that, and in his life he consistently sought to obey God in everything and honor God. And so he falls into, verse 14, you are my friends if you do what I command you. And he is looking at the mediator in heaven and saying, that's my friend. He's my friend. He's friendly toward me. He's my friend. And I am his friend. So he's using, or this description of Jesus describing what it is to be God's friend. It applies to Job. Luke 12:4, Jesus calls his disciples friends. I tell you, my friends, Do not fear those who kill the body, and after that have nothing more that they can do. Job has already reached, that point of not being afraid of dying, right? Even though he slays me, I will hope in him. Right? He's totally past this point already. And but the point of the passage in Luke that I wanted to highlight was that Jesus calls his disciples friends. And so I wanted to say one more thing. Well, we'll get to that in a minute. Let me get back to the verses so that I can read them. I want to look at Job 16, say 19 through 22. From the NIV. So read some of these verses again. Even now, my witness is in heaven. My advocate is on high. My intercessor is my friend. As my eyes pour out tears to God on behalf of a man, he pleads with God as one pleads for a friend. Only a few years will pass before I take the path of no return. Job is, considering his intercessor and crying tears of joy about it. And I think that there's a passage that Jesus said about Abraham. Some of you might remember it. It was in John chapter 8. Jesus, speaking of Abraham, he said, Abraham rejoiced to see my day. Rejoiced to see my day. And this implies Abraham understood something about Christ and looked forward in his eye of faith to the day that God would send Christ, the Redeemer. But here's Job. He's rejoicing to see the Redeemer. He's looking ahead and he's grasping it by faith. And he's saying, this is relevant to me, right? Changes the course of my life, and it will change the relationship with God. It will make all things right. So, and I think, I guess I'll say this. I think that the idea that Job and Abraham and the Old Testament saints, that thing that Jesus says about Abraham, that he looked forward to the day of Christ and the coming of Christ, and he rejoiced because he saw it, that with all the implications about what that means for what the Old Testament saints understood, right? It changes the way you think about what they understood. I think the content of their understanding was much greater than we often give them credit. And this has bearing on the long-standing debate on how do you interpret the Old Testament. And so I'll just make a few comments about that. So there is a redemptive historical approach, which is what I'm following generally. I'm trying to look at the Bible in the context of the history of redemption and God's plan to redeem a people with Christ, and that plan is the major context that every verse in the Bible is in, and that ultimately they're all about Christ and his redemptive work. So there's the redemptive historical approach, which is, like I said, what I am attempting to do. Hopefully I'm doing that well. And then there is a historical grammatical approach, and they are not the same. The historical grammatical approach says you have to look at the history. In other words, the context, the historical context. The context is the historical setting, and it's more precisely the historical setting of the writer and the historical setting of his audience. Okay, just like with any human book, right? Like the letters of Abraham Lincoln. You have to understand the times that he was writing in and the people whom he was sending the letters to, their situation. Historical and grammatical just means you interpret it according to the words. Most Christians are taught historical grammatical. But the problem with that is that historical grammatical, you're left with the major teachers of the system saying things like, what we want to discover is the author's original intended meaning. By that, they mean the human author's original intended meaning. And then what they mean, how they try to define that is they say things like this, like, well, he couldn't have known about Jesus. I mean, he's writing in this historical situation 2,000 years before Jesus comes. How could he know anything about Jesus? So we can't take the New Testament into consideration. We can only look at the Old Testament and its historical setting and the grammar that's being used. Job rejoiced to see Jesus's day. He saw it and he rejoiced. That means he understood something. He understood New Testament teaching before the New Testament. He understood things about the Messiah before the Messiah came. And that means that historical grammatical, if it is reliant on theories of what the human author could or could not have known, it's going to let you down. You can't interpret that way. So I don't think anybody here is doing that, but just to let you know, there's these two major ways of approaching and interpreting the Bible. And I think doing it in the context of God's redemptive history, another way to say that maybe in the context of the covenants, the covenantal revelation of God, taking it seriously when Jesus says it's all about him. And then you've got to presuppose that when Moses was writing, he knew about Jesus. But I think that's not too hard. I think you can prove that from the Bible. So anyway, just something I was thinking about today because I was reading an essay on historical grammatical again. It's like, oh, these guys don't get it. That's the way I was taught, though. I was taught that way. So there is hope. Oh. All right. So in verse 21 in the ESV, Job says his friend would argue the case of a man with God as a son of man does with his neighbor. And I wanted to look at Psalm 80, verse 14 through 19 about that. Turn again, O God of hosts, look down from heaven and see. Have regard for this vine, the stock that your right hand planted. He's talking about Israel, right? The vine that God has planted. Isaiah 5, the vine, it's the vine that God planted. And for the
Excuse me, what are
son,
the verses again?
oh, yes, Psalm 80, verses
Yeah.
14 to 19. 14 to 19
All right,
in
that's-
Psalm 80.
Thank you, that's what I missed. Thank you.
Yeah. So in 14 again, turn, and I'm reading from the ESV. Turn again, O God of hosts, look down from heaven and see. Have regard for this vine, the stock that your right hand planted, and for the son whom you made strong for yourself. That's an interesting thing. Now, Israel is the son of God, right? So you can read it like that. Exodus 4:22, this is my son, my firstborn son, Israel. Verse 16, they have burned it, that is Israel, the temple, Jerusalem. They have burned it with fire. They've cut it down. May they perish at the rebuke of your face. But let your hand be on the man of your right hand, the Son of Man, whom you have made strong for yourself. Then we shall not turn back from you. Give us life, and we will call upon your name. Restore us, O Lord God of hosts. Let your face shine, that we may be saved. So Job uses the phrase "Son of Man" in making a simile with how the mediator is going to represent him. And that made me think of this passage where God is being called upon in the face of the persecution and destruction of Israel, his people, his son, that he would have regard for the son at his right hand, which I don't believe is Israel in the psalm. I think the one at his right hand, the son who's at his right hand, is the one who's spoken of in Psalm 110. Right? The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies a footstool. And so here we have a kind of almost an incidental reference to the Son of God being seated at the right hand of the Father and interceding for his people. So I find that to be interesting. So I'm specifically looking at verse 15. Actually 15 and 17, 17 really. The man at your right hand, the Son of Man, who you made strong for yourself. So thought I would just go there in case anybody was spurred to think about that a little bit. I think it's interesting. And now we get to chapter 17, which is Job's not so complete despair. Mom, can you read that?
I can as soon as I get to it.
Okay.
Is it in your list?
Probably not.
Okay, just a minute.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, it's not.
17.
Ran out of
Okay.
space there.
All right. Ta-da, ta-da, ta-da. Okay. Well, what came up was the NIV. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. From the NIV. My spirit is broken. My days are cut short. The grave awaits me. Surely mockers surround me. My eyes must dwell on their hostility. Give me, O God, the pledge you demand. Who else will put up security for me? You have closed their minds to understanding. Therefore, you will not let them triumph. If anyone denounces their friends for reward, the eyes of their children will fail. God has made me a byword to everyone, a man in whose face people spit. My eyes have grown dim with grief. My whole frame is but a shadow. The upright are appalled at this. The innocent are aroused against the ungodly. Nevertheless, the righteous will hold to their ways, and those with clean hands will grow stronger. But come on, all of you, try again. I will not find a wise man among you. My days have passed. My plans are shattered. Yet the desires of my heart turn night into day. In the face of the darkness, light is near. If the only home I hope for is the grave, if I spread out my bed in the realm of darkness, if I say to corruption, you are my father, and to the worm, my mother or my sister, where then is my hope? Who can see any hope for me? Will it go down to the gates of death? Will we descend together into the dust?
Thanks. So this is the end, I think, of it's the end of this speech of Job, this last chapter here. And I hope you can see at the very end, he is holding out hope. He's saying, if my hope is to die, then what hope is that? And so he's rejecting that as his hope. He's saying, I must cling on to hope, and it's not in death. Nevertheless, the chapter is bracketed by references to the grave. You have 17:1, the grave awaits me, the last line in 17:1, and then 13 to 16, right, the last several verses, right? If the only home I hope for is the grave, if I spread out my bed in the realm of darkness, if I say to corruption, you are my father, and to the worm, my mother or my sister, where then is my hope? Who can see any hope for me? Will it go down to the gates of death? Will we descend together in the dust? So that this idea of the grave is kind of brackets everything, kind of giving it all a dark cast. And of course, everything that he says here, in chapter 17, it doesn't really sound like the same type of hopeful speech that we had in the middle or the end of chapter 16 about the Redeemer who is in heaven. We don't get that anymore. There's no residual joy at that. Now he's just describing his present condition, and his present conditions is not enviable at all, right? He says that in verse 2, his counselors, he's talking about his counselors, surely mockers surround me, and my eyes must dwell on their hostility. So he sees enemies when he looks at his friends, hostile mockers. And it's not unreasonable to think that there might be a smaller crowd around of just townspeople walking by and going, you know, what's going on here? Look how bad it is today. It's been going on for a while, right? And maybe there's people who are taking the side of one or all of the speakers and condemning Job as they, you know, verbally abusing him as they walk by. So it's not a good situation. And he says to God in verse 3, NIV, give me, O God, the pledge you demand. Who else will put up security for me? In the ESV, lay down a pledge for me with you. Who is there who will put up security for me? This again is a very logical and rational based argument, but I think it is found, the foundation is in the revelation of God to him and his understanding of who God is. He's saying, I don't have what you're demanding. You have to supply it. Since I know that it will be demanded, or I'm sorry, I will be proved right in the end. And to be proved right, I must supply this thing that you're demanding, which I don't have. Then I know you will supply it. Now, doesn't this sound like Luther's insight, right? Luther's insight about righteousness, the righteousness of God. He said, this is not the righteousness which God merely demands, but he demands and supplies. He supplies this righteousness that he demands because we don't have it. God must supply it. If there's going to be any good relationship with God, he must supply the things he's demanded. And this is what Job concludes, right? Job concludes this too. He says, you're looking for something in me that I don't have, but I have a representative in heaven and he's got it, right? Give me what you demand. Look at my representative. He's going both ways, and both of those ways are true, right? They're both what we see from the New Testament explanation. In verse 4, he says, 3 and 4, continuing with 4, you have closed their minds to understanding, therefore you will not let them triumph. Talking about his friends, you've closed their minds to understanding, the people who are mocking him. He's saying, these people are mocking me and my friends have got it all wrong, but why is that? Ultimately, it's because you've closed their minds, right? It's kind of reminiscent of, and Job doesn't say this, but it sounds somewhat reminiscent of Jesus. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing, right? You've closed their mind. Job draws a really interesting conclusion, though, which I think we can apply to the crucifixion as well. Job says, you've closed their minds to understanding, therefore you will not let them triumph. Job says, this is all part of your plan. You're the one who closed their minds. And so their closed minds must be serving a different purpose, a greater purpose. And what they're planning, though wrong and misguided, and though it seems like they're maybe prevailing, they will not ultimately win. Because God, you are the one who's in control. And, you know, this presupposes, of course, that his understanding of the situation, that he's righteous and they're wrong in their accusations, is actually God's understanding, and it is. So that's a really interesting. I find encouragement in verse 4. Right.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
It's about verse 5.
Okay.
How does that fit with this thought? Because in both of the translations I'm looking at, it's grouped together 3 to 5.
Right.
I mean, it sounds like a threat, you know?
Well, I think it's not, I don't think he's pronouncing it like a threat. I don't think he's talking to his friends. It would be a threat if he was talking to his friends.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he's kind of just been talking to God and then boom, or talking to himself. You could even think that he's talking to himself about his situation. He's not trying to explain it to his friends. But I think this is a counter to fatalism, strict determinism, which would be, God, you've closed their minds to understanding, therefore they're not responsible. That would be the logical outcome of determinism. But instead, he says, for probably our benefit, they're culpable. Yeah, they're blind, and you close their minds to understanding, but they are culpable for what they do, and there will be consequences, punishment, covenant curses, however you want to say it. So I think it's a corrective, not a corrective like he said something wrong, but a corrective to us who might read verse 4, and if there wasn't a verse 5 there, not think in terms so much of the sovereignty of God, but of the causality. We think who's responsible here? The answer always is both parties, God and the person, God and the human. God never does anything wrong. He's right to do that. So he's to be praised for it. On the other hand, it's always wrong for people to throw their friends to the wolves. So they're culpable. So anyway, that's how I understand it. Does anybody else have any thoughts about the relationship between 3, 4, and 5, particularly verse 5?
No.
No.
Okay. Is what I said satisfactory?
Yes.
Mhm.
Mom's
I'll
going,
think about it.
maybe. Yeah, mom's going to let me know.
I guess the only thing, additional thing I see in here is I think it's saying something about like verse 3 where it says we talked about the pledge, give me God the pledge you demand. So this is essentially the righteousness that God provides, right?
Right.
No, so I think I take that in like the distinction or counter to what they're talking about. I wasn't really sure what to make of verse 5 either. But I think that those might be related. He's talking about the wise who are like sort of passing these judgment or claiming this understanding of things and getting this reward of accolades or people telling them they're wise or some self-satisfaction that they they think they know and they think they understand righteousness, and they think that so I guess the lack of understanding they have is that this reward that they think they have is not acceptable to God. It's not really righteousness that they think it is. Like Job is understanding that whatever righteousness he might need to be redeemed can only be provided by God. And then verse 5 there presents the Job's friends there who think that they can supply the pledge that God needs through their own wisdom. And
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Okay. Well, I'll think about that to quote somebody else. Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, definitely it is a challenging verse there. All right, I see that it's almost 8. No, we might get to the end, it's possible. Then we could have a clean start next week with how Job portrays Christ, how he's a type, how he's a shadow. So 17:6, God has made me a byword to everyone, a man in whose face people spit. What he means there is, to many people, Job is a morality tale. People walk by, they look at Job and they go, man, that's the guy who, he was such a hypocrite. He looked like he was righteous, but man, he did something terrible and look what God did to him. Right. he's a byword. His name conjures up this morality tale of, don't put on these righteous airs. You actually really do need to repent. God will get you if you are pretending to be righteous. So, great sinners always come to a terrible end is the story that people would get. And so, of course, they also treat him with great disrespect. Spitting on him is one example of that. Great disrespect. In 17:7, he's fading away, right? His eyes have grown dim with grief. The whole frame is but a shadow. He's disappearing. And 8 and 9 talk about the reaction of the righteous to Job. The upright are appalled at this. The innocent are aroused against the ungodly. Nevertheless, the righteous will hold to their ways, and those with clean hands will grow stronger. So he's, I think, drawing some comfort in the fact that the righteous, those who actually do know God, although they are appalled by Job's situation and maybe the condition that he's in, and maybe they believe the story, that his friends are giving, that Job has sinned greatly and God is judging him, that it's not going to do anything but encourage them to be more righteous, even though they've got the message wrong and all garbled. God's going to use that to cause them to hold to their ways and grow stronger in righteousness. It's very similar to, when Paul said, look, those guys out there preaching the gospel they're mocking it. I'm rejoicing because, people are being saved. So Job is, I think, thinking that. 10 to 12 is Job's sarcasm is coming back to the surface here. But come on, all of you, try again. I will not find a wise man among you. My days have passed, my plans are shattered, yet the desires of my heart turn night into day. In the face of darkness, light is near. I'm going to read verse 12 from the ESV. They make night into day. The light, they say, is near to the darkness. I think he's talking about his friends. He's saying, I haven't heard a wise thing from you. You look at the darkness and you say, it's light. Or you look at the light and you say, it's darkness. You are just so far off the mark that you try again, I don't expect to hear anything good from you, though. I think that's the whole. I think he's given up, right? Given up on them. He's like, hey, you have not been helpful. I've tried to find some helpful words here, but nothing's come yet. Regarding himself, he says he barely has any hope or desire left. He's not, and in saying that, it sounds like he's saying, I'm done defending myself to you. And then in 13 to 16, if the only home, I'll read it in ESV. If I hope for Sheol as my house, if I make my bed in darkness, if I say to the pit, you are my father, and to the worm, my mother or my sister, where then is my hope? Who will see my hope? We'll go down to the bars of Sheol. Shall we descend together into the dust? I think he's using hope in two different ways, right? He's talking about hoping for Sheol. If I hope in Sheol, and he's basically saying, if I abandon all hope and long to die, that's how he's using hope there. And then he says, where then is my hope? And he says, look, if I hope to die, then where is my hope of being acquitted in heaven by my advocate? Right? So he's still holding on to hope here at the very end. And in these verses 17, chapter 17, 13 to 16, he's actually abandoning hopes in dying and clinging to hopes in the one in heaven. And so it's ending different than previous speeches have, right? Previous speeches sound like darkness, but you get to the end, there's light in the middle, but you get to the end and it's dark. But here he's got something he's going to hold on to. And so I think this is a very significant turning point, right? And the way he describes his situation is really terrible. And it seems very bleak, but he's uncharacteristically almost holding out hope at the end here. So
I think that's
if
a really
anybody,
good point because in the past he has hoped to die
yeah,
and
yeah,
stated he
Mhm.
hoped he would die. Just kill me, get it over with. And now he really is saying, if that's what I hope for, that's ridiculous. That is not what I hope for. I mean, that's
right,
what he's saying.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So he's making definite progress.
Yeah.
And so I think it all goes back to, his actual relationship with God. He actually knows God, and he's clinging to that. He's clinging to what he remembers and knows about God and his relationship with him. And he has set all of his hope that God is as God has revealed himself. And that
And the
gives rise to,
takeaway is,
yeah,
aren't we all, isn't that what we are required and expected to do too?
absolutely. Yeah. They said at the beginning of the study, long time ago, however many weeks it was, at the very beginning of the Job study, that Job, the most significant thing in the book of Job, the problem is God's silence. That Job is a suffering believer, and he's faced with God's silence, and he longs for the appearing of God, for God to appear and make things right. And that is our situation. That is our exact situation. And so that Job can tell us a lot, and we see ourselves, I think, I mean, Job is extreme in his suffering, so it's hard to see ourselves in that. But if you generalize his situation, then we can see ourselves pretty easily in what's happening. Next week, I'm going to make the observation that it's a whole lot easier to see Jesus in Job than it is to see yourself. As easy as it is at times to see yourself, Job is really a picture of Jesus. And so, I mean, there's a dual picture, right? Because he's also a believer in Jesus going through this. So, all right. Anybody else have anything you want to add?
No.
All right. So I am looking forward to next week. I think it's going to be, I hope it's going to be really good. I think it's going to be good. And chapter 18 is also going to be pretty awesome, where Bildad, just a preview, Bildad says, this is the conclusion of Bildad's speech. Job, you don't even know God and you're going to hell.
So,
So,
Friends like these,
yeah.
With
Just when
friends
you think,
like
just when
that
you
who
think
need
you've,
enemies.
he's
yeah, exactly.
Mr.
Just when you think
Pollyanna.
you've heard it all, right? Yeah, just well, with that, we won't get there for a couple of weeks, but you could read ahead and you
Okay,
could see, because Bildad, he's pretty sure.
it is okay to read ahead of these. Yeah.
Oh yeah, please do. All right, I'm gonna stop the recording.